Amidst the chaotic traffic, a poor boy knocks on the window of a luxury car, pleading for help. On the other side of the glass, a lonely millionaire decides to listen. What he finds in a hidden alley changes everything inside him, and from that unlikely encounter, a new family is born, forged by love and compassion. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Let's continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. The city of New York was waking up under a sky heavy with grey clouds, heralding another day of fine, persistent rain. Traffic was already churning on the main avenues, with horns echoing impatiently between the skyscrapers that tore at the skyline. In the midst of that urban chaos, inside a black imported sports car, Robert Alden adjusted the knot of his Italian tie, while listening to the financial news on the radio. At 42, he had built an empire in the culinary world, owning one of the most prestigious restaurant chains in the city. His name was synonymous with success, sophistication, and exclusivity. Robert had everything money could buy. He lived in a duplex penthouse on the Upper East Side, belonged to the best clubs, traveled abroad constantly, and moved among influential people who admired his career. But behind that flawless facade, there was a deep emptiness that he rarely admitted, not even to himself. His love life was a desert. Superficial relationships came and went without leaving a mark, and loneliness grew heavier in the silent nights of his luxurious apartment. He had learned to fill this void with work, ambition, and a meticulously organized routine that left no room for vulnerability. On that Thursday morning, while waiting for a green light at a busy intersection on Fifth Avenue, Robert was distractedly scrolling through his phone, answering business messages and checking his day's schedule. He had meetings scheduled, contracts to review, an interview with a food magazine, and a business dinner at night. Everything perfectly planned, as always. The light was still. Red when he heard a muffled sound against the driver's side window. It was a timid knock, almost imperceptible amidst the traffic noise. Robert looked up and felt his heart give a small jolt. Outside, pressed against the tinted glass, was a frail-looking boy, no more than 8 years old. His face was smudged with dirt. His large brown eyes were overflowing with tears, and his ragged clothes hung on his thin frame like old rags. The boy was knocking on the window with his two small hands, his mouth moving in pleas that Robert couldn't quite hear over the closed window and the ambient noise. Robert's first reaction was to ignore him. He was used to seeing children begging on the streets and had learned over the years to harden his heart to such scenes. It was a necessary defense, he thought, to avoid being shaken by the misery that invaded every corner of the metropolis. But something about this boy was different. It wasn't the usual expression of someone asking for money. It was pure, authentic, urgent desperation. The boy's eyes were pleading for something far beyond coins or food. It was a cry for help, against all. His instincts, Robert lowered the power window a few inches. Immediately, the boy's high-pitched, trembling voice filled the car's interior, laden with panic and urgency. "Please, sir, please, you have to help me. It's my mum. She's really sick. She can't breathe right. I tried to get help, but nobody stops, nobody listens. Please, you have to come with me. I don't know what to do anymore." His voice broke with every word, and tears streamed uncontrollably down his dirty face. Robert felt something strange stir inside his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. It was compassion, mixed with a pang of guilt. He looked around. The light was still red. Behind him, drivers were honking impatiently, waiting for the light to change. The boy was still there, clinging to the window, his eyes fixed on Robert as if he were the last hope in the world. "Where is your mother?" Robert asked, his voice coming out drier than he intended. "Over there, sir. Right over there." The boy pointed to a narrow alleyway between two commercial buildings, just a few yards away. "She's down there, under a tarp. She's burning up with fever. She can't stand up. I tried to buy medicine, but I don't have any money, and the man at the pharmacy wouldn't give me anything. Please, sir." Robert closed his eyes for a moment. He knew he should just drive on. He knew this wasn't his problem. He had appointments, responsibilities, an entire organized life that would be disrupted if he got out of that car. But something stronger spoke within him at that moment. Perhaps it was the distant memory of his own difficult childhood, before he had achieved everything he had. Perhaps it was just humanity, that spark he had been trying to suffocate for so long. The light turned green. The horns behind him grew more insistent. Robert took a deep breath, turned on his hazard lights and, to the boy's own surprise, pulled the car into the first available spot he found a few feet ahead. He got out of the vehicle, locked the doors with the remote and walked back to where the boy was still standing, in disbelief. "Take me to her," Robert said, his voice firm but not harsh. The boy's eyes widened, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing, and he quickly darted towards the dark alley, looking back every few steps to make sure the man in the elegant suit was still following him. Robert entered the alley cautiously. The smell of dampness, accumulated trash, and urine assaulted his nostrils. The ground was covered with dirty water, soaked cardboard, and all sorts of debris. The walls of the buildings on both sides were covered in graffiti, peeling paint, with exposed electrical wires dangling dangerously. At the back of the alley, leaning against an exposed brick wall, was a makeshift structure made of cardboard boxes, pieces of wood, and a torn blue tarp. This was where the boy lived with his mother. Robert felt his stomach turn. He drove down this avenue every day and had never noticed this alley, this forgotten corner of the city where human beings were trying to survive. The boy ducked down and lifted a corner of the tarp. Robert crouched beside him and saw the woman for the first time. She was lying on a thin, torn mattress, her body curled in a fetal position, shivering violently. She must have been around 30, but her extreme thinness, sickly pallor, and matted hair made her look older. She wore a worn-out sweatshirt and a pair of stained jeans. Her face was flushed, sweaty, and she was breathing with difficulty, making a hoarse sound with each inhalation. Robert didn't need to be a doctor to see that the woman was gravely ill, probably a severe respiratory infection, perhaps pneumonia. Without treatment, she wouldn't survive much longer. Mom, look, I brought a man to help. He's going to take you to the hospital, Mom. You're going to get better," the boy said, his voice choked with emotion as he held his mother's cold, trembling hand. The woman opened her eyes, with effort. They were green eyes, beautiful but deeply tired. She tried to speak, but only a faint whisper escaped her chapped lips. "Don't worry, son," she murmured, coughing immediately after, her body shaking with the force of the cough. Robert felt something break inside him. The scene was unbearable. Without a second thought, he took out his phone and dialed 911. He requested an ambulance urgently, gave the approximate address of the alley, and stressed the gravity of the situation. While waiting for confirmation, he took off his suit jacket and placed it over the woman's shivering body, trying to warm her. "The ambulance will be here soon," he told the boy, who was looking at him with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "What's your name?" "Gabriel, sir. And my mum's name is Helen." Gabriel and Helen. Robert committed the names to memory. He sat on the dirty ground, not caring about the designer trousers that would surely be ruined, and remained there beside the two of them, waiting for help to arrive. Gabriel wouldn't let go of his mother's hand, whispering words of comfort, promising that everything would be okay. Robert watched it all in silence, feeling strangely out of place and at the same time deeply connected to this reality he had always ignored. The ambulance took almost 20 minutes to arrive, but finally the siren echoed through the narrow alley. 2 paramedics got out with a stretcher and equipment. Robert quickly explained the situation, and they acted efficiently, checking Helen's vital signs, placing an oxygen mask on her face, and carefully transferring her to the stretcher. Gabriel wanted to get into the ambulance with his mother, but was stopped by the paramedics, who cited a lack of space and safety protocols. "I'll go with him," Robert said, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "We'll follow the ambulance to the hospital." The paramedics looked surprised at the well-dressed man, but didn't question him. Helen was loaded into the ambulance, and the doors closed. The vehicle sped off, its siren tearing through the New York morning air. Robert took Gabriel by the hand, and they both ran back to the sports car. The boy got into the passenger seat, still in shock, the tears drying on his dirty face. Robert started the engine and sped off after the ambulance. Gabriel looked out the window, silent, clutching his small hands to his chest. Robert didn't know exactly what to say, so he opted for silence, but he cast sidelong glances at the boy, noticing details he hadn't perceived before. His bare, bruised feet, his dirty fingernails, the extreme thinness of his arms, the scratch marks on his body. This boy had been through far more than any child ever should. They reached the emergency room of Mount Sinai Hospital in less than 15 minutes. Robert parked illegally, and they both ran through the emergency entrance. Helen was already being taken to an examination room. A nurse tried to stop Gabriel, but Robert intervened. He's her son. He needs to stay close. The nurse hesitated, but something in Robert's natural authority made her yield. They were led to a private waiting area where they could wait for news. Gabriel sat on a plastic chair, swinging his legs nervously, his eyes fixed on the door through which his mother had disappeared. Robert went to the reception desk and handled all the bureaucratic matters. He filled out forms, authorized tests, guaranteed that all costs would be covered by him, presented documents, and even spoke directly with the hospital's administrative director, who recognized the name Robert Alden immediately. With his influence and resources, he ensured that Helen would receive the best possible care. When he returned to the waiting room, he found Gabriel still in the same position, quiet, scared. Robert sat next to him. "Are you hungry?" he asked. Gabriel nodded shyly. Robert called an attendant and asked for some food to be brought. Minutes later, sandwiches, juice, fruit, and even a chocolate bar appeared. Gabriel devoured everything with a voracity that broke Robert's heart. It was obvious the boy hadn't eaten properly in days, perhaps weeks. While Gabriel ate, Robert asked subtle questions, trying to better understand their story. He found out that Helen was 31 and had lost her job as a cleaner about 6 months ago. Unable to pay the rent for the small room where they lived, they were evicted. Since then, they had been living on the streets, constantly moving, trying to survive on what little they could beg or find. Gabriel hadn't been to school in almost a year. Helen tried to protect him as best she could, but the situation was becoming increasingly unsustainable. And now sick, she was on the verge of total collapse. Robert listened to it all with a mixture of shock and shame. How was it possible that in the 21st century, in one of the largest cities in the world, a mother and son could live in such inhumane conditions? And how had he, who drove down the same avenue every day, never truly seen it? Hours passed. Robert cancelled all his meetings for the day, sending brief messages to his assistants and partners. His priority was now something else. Gabriel dozed beside him, physically and emotionally exhausted. Robert covered the boy with his own jacket, which still smelled of expensive cologne, and continued to wait. Finally, around 3 in the afternoon, a doctor came out of the emergency room and called for the person responsible for Helen Carter. Robert stood up immediately, gently waking Gabriel. The two of them approached the doctor, a middle-aged man with a serious but kind demeanor. "The situation was critical," the doctor began. "She has a severe respiratory infection, advanced dehydration, malnutrition, and a very high fever. If it had been a few more hours, we might not have been able to reverse it. But she responded well to the initial medication. She's stable now, receiving antibiotics, IV fluids, and oxygen. She'll need to be hospitalized for at least a week, maybe more depending on her progress." "Is she going to be okay?" Gabriel asked, his voice small and trembling. The doctor smiled and placed a hand on the boy's head. "Yes, she's going to be okay, thanks to you for getting help in time." Gabriel burst into tears, this time of relief. Robert felt his own eyes well up, something that hadn't happened in years. The doctor allowed them to see Helen for a few minutes. She was in a clean bed covered with white sheets, with an IV in her arm and an oxygen mask on her face. She looked more peaceful, breathing more regularly. When she saw Gabriel, her eyes filled with tears. The boy ran to the bed and held her hand, whispering that everything was fine, that she would get better, that he was there. Helen looked at Robert, who remained at a distance, respecting their moment. Her lips moved, trying to form words. Robert approached. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice weak but sincere. "Thank you for saving my life, for saving my son." Robert didn't know what to say. He just nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. It was nothing, he managed to murmur, but they both knew that was a lie. It had been everything. When they left the room, it was already getting dark outside. Robert looked at Gabriel, who seemed lost, unsure of where to go. The reality hit him like a punch. The boy had nowhere to go back to. The dark alley, that miserable shelter of tarp and cardboard, was all they had. "You're staying with me tonight," Robert said, surprising himself. "We'll find a better place for you to sleep." Gabriel looked at him with wide eyes. "Really, sir?" "Really. And you can call me Rob." That night, Robert took Gabriel to his penthouse on the Upper East Side. The boy entered the immense space, with its high ceilings, designer furniture, works of art on the walls, and a privileged view of the city, completely stunned. Robert prepared a warm bath for him, provided clean clothes, albeit far too large, and made a simple dinner. He watched Gabriel eat with pleasure, drink a glass of warm milk, and finally relax, perhaps for the first time in months. He put the boy to sleep in one of the guest rooms, which was always empty. Gabriel fell asleep in minutes, his body finally allowing itself to rest in safety. Robert sat there, on the edge of the bed, watching the boy's peaceful face, and felt something he hadn't experienced in years: purpose, belonging, humanity. As he walked back to his own room, Robert stopped in front of the hallway mirror and looked at his reflection. He saw a different man. Still the same features, but with something new in his eyes, something that looked like hope. He sat on the edge of his own bed, still processing everything that had happened on that extraordinary day. He picked up his phone and saw dozens of unanswered messages from partners, clients, employees. They all wanted to know where he was, why he had cancelled important appointments, why he wasn't answering his calls. Robert looked at those messages and, for the first time, they seemed completely irrelevant. What did a business meeting matter compared to what he had experienced that day? He thought about his own journey. Robert had grown up in a lower-middle-class family in upstate New York. His parents worked hard to support 3 children, and he, the eldest, always knew he would have to carve out his own space in the world through his own efforts. He attended public school, worked from a young age to help at home, and went to business school at night while working during the day. Every step he climbed was earned with sweat and determination. When he finally managed to open his first restaurant at 28, using all the savings he had accumulated over the years and a risky bank loan, Robert swore to himself that he would never face financial hardship again. Business prospered beyond his expectations. In a few years he opened a second restaurant, then a third, then an entire chain. Money began to flow in abundantly, and with it came social recognition, prestige, and friendships of convenience. But somewhere along that climb, Robert had lost something essential. He had grown distant from his family, visiting his parents only on holidays. His siblings followed different paths, and communication between them became rare and superficial. Romantic relationships came and went, always sabotaged by his excessive dedication to work or his difficulty in genuinely trusting anyone. True friends were rare. Most people around him were interested in professional connections or the benefits of knowing a successful entrepreneur. Robert had built an empire, but in the process, he had become a prisoner of his own ambition. He woke up early, worked late, attended social events where he smiled and feigned interest, but came home empty. In recent years especially, the sense of futility had intensified. What was all that money for if there was no one to share it with? What was success for if there was no purpose beyond accumulating more success? And then, on that seemingly ordinary morning, a desperate boy had knocked on his window, and everything changed. Robert couldn't rationally explain why he had stopped, why he had gotten involved, why he had taken it so far. But looking now at the room where Gabriel slept peacefully, for the first time in years, he felt he was doing something that truly mattered, something that transcended financial spreadsheets and market strategies. He lay down in bed, but sleep was slow to come. His mind kept replaying every moment of that surreal day. The image of Helen shivering under that torn tarp was etched in his memory. How was it possible for human beings to live in those conditions in the 21st century? How had he, who drove down that avenue every day, never truly seen that reality? Robert had always made donations to charities, mainly for corporate image and tax benefits, but they were distant, impersonal acts that required no real involvement. Signing a check was easy. Looking into the eyes of misery smelling it, touching it, was completely different. It was visceral, uncomfortable, impossible to ignore once you had truly seen it. The first rays of sun entered through the guest room window, softly illuminating Gabriel's face. The boy opened his eyes slowly, confused for a moment, not recognizing where he was. The high ceiling, the white walls, the clean smell, the softness of the mattress beneath him. It was all so different from the damp cardboard and torn tarp that it took a few seconds for the memory of the previous day to come rushing back. His sick mother, the man in the suit who stopped to help, the hospital, this immense apartment. It hadn't been a dream. It was real. Gabriel sat up in bed, still wearing the oversized t-shirt Robert had lent him the night before. His bare feet touched the light wood floor, and he stood up carefully, almost afraid to make a sound. He opened the bedroom door slowly and stepped into the hallway. The apartment was quiet, but he could smell fresh coffee coming from somewhere. He followed the aroma and arrived at a modern kitchen, fully equipped with appliances that looked like they were out of a magazine. Robert was there, his back to him, still wearing a simple t-shirt and sweatpants, making breakfast. When he heard Gabriel's light footsteps, he turned and smiled. "Good morning, Gabriel. Did you sleep well?" The boy nodded shyly, not quite sure how to act in this unusual situation. Robert pulled out a chair for him and served a plate with fresh bread, butter, jam, cheese, ham, and a large glass of orange juice. Gabriel ate slowly, savoring every bite, still impressed by the abundance on the table. "We're going to visit your mum at the hospital today," Robert said while drinking his coffee. "But first, we need to take care of a few things. You need proper clothes, shoes, and we have to think about a better place for you to stay when she's discharged." Gabriel stopped chewing and looked at Robert with wide eyes. "Are you really going to keep helping us?" Robert felt a tightness in his chest at the question. It was as if the boy was used to being abandoned, to not being able to trust anyone. "I am," he answered firmly. "You're not going back to that alley, I guarantee it." After breakfast, Robert took Gabriel to a nearby mall. It was a revealing experience for both of them. Gabriel had never been inside a clothing store like that, with so many options, colors, and sizes. Robert carefully chose simple but good quality items: pants, t-shirts, a comfortable pair of sneakers, underwear, a light jacket. Gabriel tried everything on with a mixture of embarrassment and wonder, still not believing it was all for him. As they left the store carrying several bags, Robert noticed people staring. Some seemed to be judging the scene, others showed curiosity. But he didn't care. For the first time in a long time, he was doing something that truly mattered, something that went beyond profits, contracts, and corporate meetings. They arrived at the hospital in the early afternoon. Helen was awake, sitting up in bed, looking a little better than the day before. Her face was still pale, but her eyes had more life in them. When she saw Gabriel walk into the room in new, clean clothes, her face lit up with a faint but genuine smile. "My son, you look so handsome," she murmured, holding out her arms. Gabriel ran into her embrace, careful not to bump the IV tubes and monitor wires. Robert stood near the door, watching the reunion with an emotion that surprised him. Helen looked at him over Gabriel's head and her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know how to thank you for what you're doing for us," she said, her voice still weak but full of feeling. "I don't even really know your name." "Robert Alden, but you can just call me Rob." "Rob," she repeated, as if committing the name to memory forever. "I have no way to repay you. I have nothing, absolutely nothing. But I swear I'll find a way to pay back everything you're doing." Robert shook his head. "You don't need to pay anything, Helen. Just focus on getting better. We'll figure out the rest later." "But I have to know," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "Why did you stop? Why did you decide to help us? So many people pass us by every day, pretending we don't exist. Why were you different?" Robert was silent for a few seconds, searching for the right words. "Honestly, I'm not sure. I think it was Gabriel's eyes. Or maybe it was just the right time. Maybe I needed this as much as you did." Helen didn't fully understand what he meant, but she nodded. In the following days, Robert established a routine. Every morning before going to the office, he would stop by the hospital with Gabriel. They would stay with Helen for a few hours, talking, bringing fruit, magazines, words of encouragement. In the afternoon, Robert would come back to pick up Gabriel, and the two would have dinner together at the penthouse. Little by little, the boy began to open up, telling stories about their life before they were homeless, the hardships they faced, their fears and hopes. Robert discovered that Gabriel was intelligent, curious, and sensitive. He liked to draw, loved superhero stories, and dreamed of one day going back to school. These conversations awakened feelings in Robert that he had long buried. He began to see in Gabriel not just a needy child, but a boy with potential, with dreams, with a future. Meanwhile, Helen was gradually recovering. The antibiotics worked, the fever broke, and her breathing returned to normal. But along with physical improvement came anxiety about the future. She knew she would be discharged soon and had nowhere to go. The dark, cold alley was not an acceptable option, but she didn't know how to start over without money, without a job, without references. It was during one of these visits that Robert brought some news. "Helen, I've rented an apartment for you and Gabriel," he said, sitting in the chair next to her bed. "It's small, simple, but it's clean, safe, and has everything you need. It's in a quiet neighborhood in Queens, with a public school nearby for Gabriel and easy transportation." Helen was stunned. "An apartment? But I can't accept that, Rob. It's too much. It's more than I could ever—" "You can and you will accept it," he interrupted gently but firmly. "It's not a favor, Helen. It's the bare minimum any human being deserves: a roof, safety, dignity. And don't worry about rent right now. Focus on recovering, on getting Gabriel back in school, on rebuilding your life. When you're ready, we'll think about work and how you can move forward." Helen couldn't hold back her tears. How long had it been since someone had treated her with such consideration, with such humanity? She, who had grown accustomed to being invisible, ignored, treated as a nuisance by society, was now facing someone who saw her as a person, as a mother, as someone who deserved a second chance. Gabriel, who was drawing in a notebook Robert had bought for him, looked from his mother to Robert. "You're kind of like an angel, aren't you?" the boy said with complete sincerity. Robert laughed, embarrassed. "No, Gabriel, I'm far from an angel. I'm just doing what should be done." Days later, Helen was discharged from the hospital. Robert was there, as always, to pick her up. He took the mother and son directly to the apartment he had prepared. It was a modest place in a lower middle-class neighborhood, but it was impeccably clean and furnished with the basics. It had one bedroom with 2 beds, a small living room with a sofa and television, an equipped kitchen and a full bathroom. The pantry was stocked with food, cleaning supplies and toiletries. In the closet, Robert had left new clothes for Helen, chosen with the help of an employee from one of the stores. When Helen entered that apartment and saw it all, she broke down in tears again. Gabriel ran through the space, exploring every corner, amazed to have a real bed, a solid roof over his head, food in the refrigerator. Robert stayed for a few hours, helping them settle in, explaining practical details, leaving his phone number and saying he was available for whatever they needed. Before leaving, he turned to Helen. "Tomorrow I'll come back so we can talk about the next step. We need to get Gabriel's school situation sorted out and think about your professional future. But today, just rest. Enjoy this moment. You deserve it." That night, after Robert left, Helen and Gabriel sat on the sofa, side by side, in silence. It was a different kind of silence, not of fear or despair, but of relief, of gratitude, of reborn hope. Gabriel rested his head on his mother's shoulder and murmured softly, "We're going to be okay." "Now, right, Mum?" Helen kissed her son's forehead and answered with conviction, "Yes, my love, we're going to be okay." In the days that followed, Robert kept his promise. He returned to the apartment, helped Helen get the necessary documents to enroll Gabriel in a nearby public school. The boy, who had missed almost a full school year, would need extra help, but the teachers were understanding and willing to help him reintegrate. Gabriel got a uniform, school supplies, a new backpack. When he walked into the classroom for the first time with a notebook under his arm and a smile on his face, Helen and Robert waited outside, moved. "He'll make it," Robert said. "He's a smart and brave boy." "Thanks to you," Helen replied. "Without you, he'd be lost. We both would be." Robert looked at her. Helen was different. Her hair, now clean and tidy, fell loosely over her shoulders. Her face, without the marks of illness and dirt, revealed delicate and beautiful features. Her green eyes shone with a light he hadn't noticed before. She wore simple but dignified clothes and carried herself with a more upright, confident posture. The transformation was striking. "And what about you?" Robert began, shifting the focus of the conversation. "Have you thought about what you'd like to do? What kind of work interests you?" Helen looked down, insecure. "I've always worked in cleaning, janitorial stuff. It's what I know. I only have a grade school education. I don't know if I'm good for anything else." Robert thought for a moment. "I have a proposal," he said. "One of my restaurants needs someone to help in the kitchen. It's nothing fancy, just simple tasks, but you'd have a steady salary, a transportation pass, a meal allowance. It's a chance to start over with a formal job with benefits. What do you think?" Helen's eyes widened. "Are you offering me a job? For me?" "I am. If you'll accept, of course." "I accept," she replied immediately, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, I accept. I promise I'll work hard. I'll do the best job possible. You won't regret it." Robert smiled. "I know I won't." Helen started work the following week. Robert took her to the restaurant himself, an elegant establishment in Greenwich Village, frequented by a sophisticated crowd. He introduced her to the manager, Mrs. Martha, an experienced and welcoming woman, who quickly noticed Helen's dedication and humility. The work was demanding, the hours were long, but Helen faced it all with an impressive disposition. She arrived early, did everything meticulously, and never complained. Her colleagues noticed her attitude, and soon began to respect her. Robert often stopped by the restaurant, always under the pretext of checking on the business, but deep down he wanted to see how Helen was adapting. He saw in her a quiet strength, a resilience that impressed him. Despite everything she had been through, she didn't play the victim, didn't ask for pity. She just worked, took care of her son, and rebuilt her life brick by brick. The weeks passed and a comfortable routine was established. Gabriel was doing well in school, making friends, and catching up on his studies. Helen was thriving at work, earning praise from the management and the chefs, and Robert, who had once been immersed only in numbers, spreadsheets, and business expansions, now found himself visiting that small apartment in Queens with increasing frequency. He brought toys for Gabriel, books, educational games. He helped the boy with his homework, told him stories, played with him, and he had long conversations with Helen, gradually discovering the woman behind the story of pain. He learned that she had grown up in an orphanage upstate, that she never knew her father, that her mother had abandoned her as a baby. She had married young to a man who seemed promising but turned out to be violent and irresponsible. When she became pregnant with Gabriel, her husband left her, leaving her alone and without resources. She fought as best she could to raise her son, but a lack of opportunities, no family support, and a series of financial setbacks led her to the streets. It was a story of abandonment, of injustice, of a system that failed its most vulnerable. But it was also a story of struggle, of a mother's love, of a hope that refused to die even in the worst circumstances. Robert found himself thinking about Helen even when he was away. During important meetings, in the middle of negotiations, at business dinners, his mind would wander back to that simple apartment, to her shy smile, to the gratitude in her green eyes. He tried to ignore these thoughts at first, telling himself it was just compassion, a sense of responsibility for their well-being. But deep down he knew it was something more. Helen also felt something changing within her. Robert wasn't just the man who had saved them. He was someone who treated Gabriel with fatherly affection, who listened to her without judgment, who believed in her when she doubted herself. He was kind, respectful, attentive, but she was afraid of being mistaken, afraid of getting attached, afraid that it was all temporary. After all, why would a man like Robert, rich, successful, cultured, be genuinely interested in someone like her? One Saturday afternoon, Robert showed up at the apartment with a surprise. "We're going out, the three of us," he announced. "I want to take you to a special place." Gabriel jumped for joy, and Helen, though hesitant, agreed. They went to Central Park, one of New York's landmarks. Gabriel ran across the lawns, played on the playgrounds, fed the ducks in the lake. Robert and Helen walked side by side, talking about trivial things, laughing at small moments, enjoying the simplicity of the day. At one point, they sat on a bench under the shade of a tree, while Gabriel played a few yards away. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I never imagined my life could be like this," Helen said suddenly, breaking the silence. "A few months ago, I thought I was going to die in that alley, that Gabriel would be left alone, with no one. And now look at this. He's in school, healthy, happy. I have a job, a home. It feels like a miracle." Robert looked at her, observing her delicate profile, her hair blowing in the wind. "It wasn't a miracle, Helen. It was you, your strength, your courage. I just opened a door. You were the one who walked through it." She turned her face to him and their eyes met. There was something there, a connection that went beyond gratitude, beyond compassion. It was something deeper, more real, more frightening. They both felt it, but neither had the courage to say anything at that moment. Gabriel came running up, breaking the spell. "Uncle Rob, look what I found," the boy shouted, showing him a shiny pebble. "Can I take it home?" "You sure can," Robert replied, ruffling the boy's hair affectionately. "Anything you find that's special, you can keep." Gabriel smiled and ran back to continue his exploration. Helen watched their interaction with a tight heart. Robert treated Gabriel like a son, and Gabriel, who had never had a father figure, was growing attached to him with a moving intensity. That night, on their way back to the apartment, Gabriel fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the day's activities. Helen prepared coffee for herself and Robert, and they sat in the small living room. The silence between them was comfortable but charged with expectation. Robert watched Helen discreetly as she stirred sugar into her cup, her delicate movements, her thoughtful expression. She seemed 1,000 miles away, lost in thoughts he couldn't decipher. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. Helen blinked, returning to the present moment. "I was just thinking about how quickly life can change. A few months ago, every day was a struggle for survival. Waking up cold, hungry, not knowing if we would have anything to eat. And now, I have a roof over my head, Gabriel is in school, I have a job. It feels unreal sometimes." "It's real," Robert assured her. "And it's going to stay that way. You earned this, Helen. It wasn't luck, it was your strength." "It was you," she corrected, finally looking him in the eyes. "If it weren't for you, I would have died in that alley. Gabriel would have been alone, probably ending up in a shelter or worse. You changed the course of our lives completely." Robert shook his head. "I just helped at the right moment, but the courage to accept help, to start over, to work hard every day, to raise that incredible boy sleeping in the other room, that was all you. Never underestimate your own strength." Helen felt her eyes well up again. It seemed like she cried for any reason lately, and it annoyed her a little. But Robert never judged her for it, never made her feel weak for showing emotion. "Can I ask you a question?" she said hesitantly. "Of course. Always." "Why are you still single? I mean, you're successful, handsome, intelligent. There must be women lining up to be with you." Robert gave a humorless laugh. "Women interested in my money and status? Yes, there's no shortage of those. But someone who really knows me, who cares about who I am beyond my bank account, that's rarer than you think. Have you ever been married?" "Almost. A few years ago I was engaged to a woman I met at a corporate event. She was elegant, educated, seemed perfect, until I found out she was cheating on me with a member of my club. The wedding was called off 2 weeks before the ceremony." Helen's eyes widened. "I'm so sorry, Rob." "Don't be. It was the best thing that could have happened. Imagine if I'd found out after we were married. It taught me to be more cautious, but it also closed me off to new possibilities. I buried myself in work and forgot there was a life beyond business. And now?" Helen's voice was almost a whisper. "Now," Robert moved a little closer, "now I remember what it feels like to feel something real. You and Gabriel made me remember that there are things much more important than contracts and profits." The air between them grew thick, charged with a tension that wasn't uncomfortable but intense. Helen could feel her heart racing, her hands slightly trembling. It had been so long since someone had looked at her that way, with that genuine interest, that affection. The coffee steamed in their cups, as Helen and Robert remained seated in the small living room, enveloped in a silence that was not uncomfortable, but filled with unspoken things. The soft light from the lamp created an intimate, almost surreal atmosphere, so different from the bright, sterile environments Robert was used to. Here, in this simple space, he felt more at home than in his own luxury penthouse. "Rob," Helen began, turning the cup in her hands, needing something to do with them. "I think a lot about all of this, about how you appeared in our lives. Sometimes it feels like I'm dreaming and I'm going to wake up back in that alley." "It's not a dream," he assured her, leaning forward slightly. "This is real. You deserve this and so much more." "But why?" Her voice came out almost as a whisper. "Why do you keep coming here? Why do you dedicate so much time to us? You have a life, a huge company, 1,000 commitments. I don't understand." Robert was silent for a moment, searching for the right words. "Because for the first time in a long time, I feel alive, Helen. My life was empty. I had money, success, everything people consider important. But I had nothing that truly mattered. I had no one to share it with, no purpose beyond making more money, expanding more businesses. You gave me something I didn't even know I needed." "And what is that?" she asked, her green eyes fixed on him. "Meaning, connection, family." The last word hung in the air between them. Helen felt her heart race. Family. It was a word she hadn't used in so long, one that had lost its meaning when she found herself alone with Gabriel, rejected by the world. And now this man, practically a stranger a few months ago, was saying that they were family to him. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice trembling. "Scared of getting used to this, of believing it can last. I've lost so much in my life. I've been abandoned so many times. I don't know if I can go through that again." Robert reached out and hesitantly touched her hand. The contact was electric, awakening something in both of them that had been suppressed for weeks. "I'm not going to abandon you, Helen. I promise you that." She looked at his hand on hers, large, warm, secure. She wanted to believe those words with every fiber of her being. But Robert didn't know what it was like to live in uncertainty, on the margins, to be disposable in the eyes of society. "You don't understand," she said, her eyes starting to well up. "You don't understand what it's like to be invisible, to walk past people every day and see them look right through you, as if you don't exist. I learned not to expect anything from anyone, because every time I did, I was disappointed." "Then let me be the exception," he replied firmly. "Let me prove that not everyone is like that." Helen gently withdrew her hand, wiping away a tear that was trickling down her face. "It's not just about me, Rob. It's about Gabriel, too. He's getting attached to you in a way that scares me. He calls you uncle, talks about you all the time, draws you in his school notebooks. If one day you get tired of all this, if you decide to move on with your life, you'll break his heart." "And you think it won't break mine, too?" Robert's voice came out more intense than he intended. "Helen, I'm doing this out of pity. I'm not doing this because I'm a good person or because I want to feel better about myself. I'm doing this because you two have become important to me, very important." The silence that followed was dense, full of meaning. Helen took a deep breath, trying to control the emotions that threatened to overflow. "I feel something too," she finally admitted, her voice barely audible. "When you come here, when you stop by the restaurant just to see me, when you play with Gabriel, I feel something I shouldn't feel." "Why shouldn't you?" Robert asked. "Because we're from different worlds," she replied with a sad smile. "You're a millionaire businessman. I'm a formerly homeless woman who works in your kitchen. People will judge, they'll talk, they'll say I'm a gold digger, that I'm taking advantage of you. I don't care what people say, but I do." Helen raised her voice slightly, her frustration showing. "I care because I've been judged my whole life. I've heard it all. I've been treated like trash. And I don't want you to be hurt by being with me." Robert stood up and knelt in front of her, holding her, hands firmly. "Helen, look at me." She hesitated, but finally lifted her face and met his eyes, intense and sincere. "You are not your past. You are not defined by the circumstances that led you to the street. You are a strong, brave, dedicated woman. You are an incredible mother, and you are someone I am falling in love with." The words hung in the air. Helen's eyes widened. She could hardly believe what she had just heard. Falling in love. Robert also seemed surprised to have said it out loud, but he didn't back down. "I know it soon," he continued. "I know it's complicated, but I can't pretend I don't feel it. Every night when I go back to my empty penthouse, all I can think about is being here, with you and Gabriel. You've given me something money never could. You've given me a reason to wake up every morning besides checking restaurant revenues." Helen was speechless. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. "I don't know what to say," she murmured. "You don't have to say anything right now," Robert replied, standing up and sitting beside her again. "I just wanted you to know how I feel, and that no matter what you decide, I'll still be here for you. That doesn't change." That night, after Robert left, Helen couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened, everything he had said. Part of her wanted to dive headfirst into that feeling, to believe it was possible, that they could build something together. But the other part, scarred by so many disappointments, whispered words of caution, reminding her that nothing lasts forever. In the following days, there was a subtle but noticeable change between them. When Robert visited, their gazes lingered a little longer. Their smiles were more meaningful. Their hands brushed against each other accidentally more often. Gabriel, with the keen perception of children, noticed it all and was happy, even if he didn't fully understand the complexity of adult feelings. One afternoon, while Helen was working at the restaurant, Mrs. Martha approached her during a break. "Can I ask you a personal question?" the manager said gently. Helen tensed up but nodded. "Of course, Mrs. Martha." "What's going on between you and Robert?" Helen felt her face flush. "Nothing, Mrs. Martha. He's just helping me." The manager smiled wisely. "My dear, I've worked here for 15 years. I've known Robert since he opened his first restaurant. I have never, ever seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. And I've never seen him so present, so attentive, so different. He's changed." Helen looked down. "I don't want to cause any trouble." "Trouble?" Mrs. Martha laughed softly. "My dear, you're doing him good. Robert has always been a lonely man, married to his work. I used to see him come in here tense, worried, always under pressure. Now he comes in smiling, asks how you are, brings sweets for the staff, jokes with everyone. You've humanized him." "But people will talk," Helen argued. "They'll say I'm a gold digger, that I'm taking advantage of the situation." "And since when should the opinions of others dictate your happiness?" Mrs. Martha placed a hand on Helen's shoulder. "My dear, life is too short to waste a chance at happiness because of what other people might think. If you like each other, if there's something real there, hold on to it tightly. The rest is just noise." Those words echoed in Helen's mind for the rest of the day. Maybe Mrs. Martha was right. Maybe she was letting fear and past traumas sabotage a real possibility of happiness. But it was so hard to let herself believe, to open her heart after protecting it for so long. The following weekend, Robert took Helen and Gabriel for a trip to the beach in the Hamptons. It was the first time Gabriel had seen the ocean. The boy's reaction was unforgettable. He ran across the sand, shouted with joy as the waves touched his feet, filled buckets with shells and pebbles, and built castles that the sea washed away. Robert played with him, chased him, pretended to be a sea monster, and carried the boy on his shoulders. Helen watched from a distance, sitting on the sand, her heart overflowing. Robert walked back to her, breathless, his hair tousled by the wind and a wide smile on his face. He looked 10 years younger like this, away from expensive suits and boardrooms. He sat beside her, and they both watched Gabriel play. "Thank you," Helen said softly. "For what?" "For all of this. For giving my son memories he'll cherish forever. For showing him that the world can be beautiful." Robert looked at her. "And you? Do you think the world can be beautiful?" Helen looked away, focusing on the horizon where the sea met the sky. "I'm starting to believe so." Robert took her hand, intertwining their fingers. This time, Helen didn't pull away. They sat there holding hands in silence, while Gabriel continued his enchanted exploration of the ocean. It was a perfect moment, suspended in time, far from the worries and fears that haunted them. On the way back to New York City, Gabriel slept in the back seat, exhausted and happy. Robert drove with one hand on the wheel, the other still holding Helen's. The silence between them was comfortable, full of unspoken promises. When they arrived at the apartment, Robert carried Gabriel in his arms to his room and laid him on the bed, still in his beach clothes. Helen lovingly covered her son, kissed his forehead, and turned off the light. When she returned to the living room, Robert was standing by the door, clearly in no hurry to leave. "Don't you want to stay a little longer?" Helen asked, her voice hesitant. "I do," he replied immediately. They sat on the sofa, again but closer this time. Helen rested her head on his shoulder, and Robert put his arm around her. They stayed like that for long minutes, just feeling each other's presence, the warmth, the comfort. "Rob," Helen whispered, "I'm scared." "Me too," he admitted. "But sometimes the best things in life come with fear." "What if it doesn't work out? What if it does?" He turned her face towards him, his eyes meeting hers. "What if this is exactly what we were both looking for, without knowing it?" Helen felt the tears return, but this time they were tears of hope. Slowly, hesitantly, she leaned in and touched her lips to his. It was a soft kiss, full of emotion, vulnerability, and promise. When they parted, both of their eyes were misty. "I don't know how to do this," Helen confessed. "It's been so long since I've trusted someone like this." "We'll learn together," Robert replied, kissing her forehead. "I don't have all the answers, Helen, but I know I want to be with you. I want to be with both of you. I want to build something real, something that matters." She nodded, finally allowing her barriers to fall. A little further. That night Robert stayed late and they talked about everything, about their fears, their hopes, the dreams they had buried and were now beginning to resurface. They talked about Gabriel, about how they wanted him to grow up happy and safe. They talked about the challenges they would face, the differences between them, but also about what they had in common, the inexplicable connection that had brought them together since that first encounter at the traffic light. When Robert finally got up to leave, it was well past midnight. At the door, he hugged Helen for a long time, as if he didn't want to let go. "I'm here," he whispered. "I'll always be here." "I know," she replied, and for the first time, she truly believed it. In the weeks that followed, their relationship blossomed naturally. There was no rush, no pressure, just shared moments, meals together, simple outings, deep conversations. Gabriel noticed the change and was radiant. One morning, as they were having breakfast, he looked at Robert and asked a question that caught them both off guard. "Uncle Rob, are you going to be my dad?" Robert nearly choked on his coffee. Helen froze. The boy looked at them with his big, hopeful eyes, waiting for an answer. "Why do you ask that, sweetie?" Helen tried to buy some time. "Because he takes care of us like a dad does. Because he likes you, Mum. I can see it. And I like him too. I want him to be my real dad." Robert felt his heart tighten. He looked at Helen, who was visibly emotional. "Gabriel," he began in a soft voice, "I would love to be your dad. But that's a big decision, one that needs to be made the right way, at the right time." "But you want to?" the boy insisted. "I do," Robert replied without hesitation. "I want to very much." Gabriel smiled, satisfied with the answer, and went back to eating his cereal as if he hadn't just completely changed the course of the conversation. Helen and Robert looked at each other, both knowing that moment had sealed something important between them. For Gabriel, the question had been simple, natural. It was just a child expressing what he felt, what he wanted. But for the two adults, those words carried immense weight. It was confirmation that their feelings didn't just affect them, but were shaping the future of this child who had already suffered so much. After Gabriel left for school, Robert helped Helen with the breakfast dishes. It was a simple, domestic gesture, but it meant a lot to her. He could hire people to do any task, yet he chose to be there side by side with her, sharing these small daily responsibilities. "Do you realize our lives have completely changed?" Helen commented as she dried a cup. "6 months ago, I was literally fighting to survive another day. And now I'm here, worrying about normal things like washing dishes and packing Gabriel's school lunch. It's surreal." Robert stopped scrubbing the plate he was holding and looked at her. "And are you happy? Truly happy?" Helen considered the question for a moment, wanting to give an honest answer. "I'm learning to be happy. I'm learning that I can trust, that I can make plans for the future, that I don't have to live in survival mode. It's a process, you know. It's not easy to switch off years of trauma and fear overnight." "I understand," Robert said, "and there's no rush. We'll go at our own pace together." Together. That word resonated with Helen in a profound way. She had never truly had someone by her side. Even when she was married, it had been an unequal partnership where she carried all the weight. But with Robert, it was different. He genuinely wanted to share, to build together. "You know what impresses me most about you?" Helen said suddenly. "What?" "It's that you don't act like you're doing me a favor. You don't have that savior complex, like someone rescuing a poor soul. You treat me as an equal, as someone who deserves respect and dignity. That makes all the difference." Robert smiled and dried his hands on a towel. "Because you are my equal, Helen. The circumstances that led you to the street don't define who you are. You're intelligent, dedicated, an incredible mother. I didn't save you. We found each other at a time when we both needed it." Those words touched Helen deeply. She moved closer to him, and for the first time since they had met, she took the initiative. She wrapped her arms around Robert's neck and kissed him tenderly. It was a different kiss from the first one, more confident, more surrendered. Robert held her by the waist, pulling her closer, responding with equal intensity. When they parted, they were both smiling. "I love you," Robert said without hesitation. "I know it's still early to say that, but it's what I feel. I love you, and I love Gabriel as if he were my own son." Helen felt the tears return, but this time they were tears of pure happiness. "I love you too. I'm scared to say it, because it feels too big, too important. But it's true. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me, along with Gabriel." They stood there, holding each other in the kitchen for long minutes, just feeling each other's presence, the certainty that they had found something precious and rare. Later, when Gabriel was at school, Helen and Robert had a serious conversation about the matter. "I want this too," she confessed. "I want us to be a real family, but I'm so afraid of messing it all up." "You won't," he assured her. "We'll make it work. Together." And so, slowly, their lives began to intertwine more and more deeply. Robert started spending some nights at the apartment on the sofa. At first, but soon Helen invited him to share her room. Gabriel grew more confident, calling Robert Dad in unguarded moments, and then quickly correcting himself, embarrassed. But Robert would always smile and say it was okay, that he could call him whatever he wanted. One day, Robert arrived at the apartment with a serious expression. Helen grew worried, thinking something was wrong. He asked her to sit down, and then he knelt before her, just as he had months earlier, when he declared his feelings. "Helen, I know our story is unusual. I know it started in a way no one would expect, but it was the best thing that ever happened to me. You and Gabriel are my family. You are my home, and I don't want to live without you anymore." He took a small box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a simple but beautiful ring. "It's not ostentatious because I know you don't like that, but it's real, like my love for you. Marry me, Helen. Let me be your husband and Gabriel's father, officially." Helen was in shock, her hands covering her mouth, tears already streaming down her face. "Yes," she managed to say through sobs. "Yes, I want to." The news of the engagement filled the small apartment with a joy that had long been absent from its walls. Gabriel, upon learning that Robert would really be his dad, jumped so much that the downstairs neighbors banged on their ceiling complaining about the noise. But no one cared. It was a moment of pure celebration, of unreserved happiness. Robert didn't want a big, pompous ceremony, Helen even less so. What they both wanted was something simple, intimate, meaningful. They decided to get married in a small chapel in their neighborhood with only a few people present. Mrs. Martha would be Helen's maid of honor, and Gabriel would be the ring bearer, obviously. A few colleagues from the restaurant were invited, as were some of Robert's trusted employees who had witnessed his transformation in recent months. But before the wedding, there was another important step to take. Robert wanted to legally adopt Gabriel. They began the process with the help of a lawyer specializing in family law. It took months of paperwork, visits from social workers, interviews and evaluations. Gabriel participated in everything seriously, answering the professionals' questions with sincerity. Yes, he wanted to be adopted by Robert. Yes, he felt safe and happy. Yes, Robert was a good father to him. During that waiting period, as the adoption process moved through the courts, the lives of the three continued to solidify into a loving and stable routine. Robert officially moved into the apartment, bringing his things over gradually. Helen continued to work at the restaurant, but now with the prospect of a different future. Robert had mentioned that, if she wanted, she could take courses, study, expand her skills. She thought about it often, imagining possibilities that once seemed impossible. Gabriel was unrecognizable. The thin, frightened boy who had knocked on the car window that day had transformed into a healthy, outgoing, energetic child. His grades in school were constantly improving, he had made friends, and he participated in extracurricular activities. His teachers praised his dedication and resilience. When asked about the radical change in his behavior, Gabriel would simply reply that he now had a real family. One afternoon, a few months after the proposal, the lawyer called with the news they had all been eagerly awaiting. The adoption had been approved by the judge. Gabriel was officially Robert Alden's son. When they received the document, the three of them hugged and cried together. It was a simple piece of paper, but it represented so much more than legality. It represented belonging, security, and unconditional love. The next day, Robert took Gabriel to the county clerk's office to have the boy's name updated. Gabriel Carter Alden. The boy stared at the new document with wide eyes, running his fingers over his own printed name, as if he couldn't believe it was real. "Now we're a real family, Dad," Gabriel said, using the title without hesitation for the first time. Robert scooped his son into his arms, not caring that he was already getting too big for it. "We always were, son, we always were." The wedding was set for the following Saturday. Helen had no family to invite, but she didn't feel sad about it. Her family was right there, in that 9-year-old boy and the man who had transformed their lives. Mrs. Martha helped Helen choose a simple but elegant white dress that enhanced her natural beauty. No elaborate veil or extravagant tiara, just a delicate arrangement of flowers in her hair. Gabriel got a small suit identical to the one Robert would wear and was extremely proud of it. He practiced his walk as the ring bearer several times, holding a small cushion with the rings, as serious as an adult. Robert watched him with a smile, marveling at how much the boy had grown and developed. On the morning of the wedding, Robert woke up early and went for a walk around the neighborhood. It was a way to process everything that was happening, to truly understand the magnitude of the change in his life. Less than a year ago, he was a lonely, empty man going from one commitment to another without really living. And now he was about to marry the woman he loved and formalize his fatherhood of the boy he already considered his son. It was almost unbelievable. He passed by the alley where he had first found Helen. The tarp shelter was no longer there. Someone had cleaned the area, or perhaps other homeless people had occupied it and then moved on. But the memory of that moment remained vivid. Robert remembered the smell, the sight of Helen shivering with fever, the desperation in Gabriel's eyes. And now, a few months later, they were about to become an official family. The ceremony was intimate and emotional. The small chapel was decorated with simple flowers, and the priest was a young, charismatic man who knew the couple's story and had been deeply touched by it. When Helen walked in, escorted by Gabriel, who led her to the altar, Robert felt tears stream down his face uncontrollably. She was beautiful, not because of the dress or the hairstyle, but because of the light that radiated from her, the genuine happiness that shone in every gesture. The vows were simple but profound. Robert promised to love, care for and protect Helen and Gabriel for the rest of his life. He promised to be a safe harbor, a home, a constant. Helen, her voice choked with emotion, promised to trust, love, and build a life full of meaning alongside Robert. She promised never to give up, never to let the fears of the past sabotage the future they were creating together. When the priest declared them husband and wife, the small group of guests applauded warmly. Gabriel, who had held the rings so carefully, presented them with a huge smile on his face. Robert kissed Helen softly, then bent down to hug Gabriel, including him in the moment. The three of them embraced there at the altar as the guests continued to applaud, many with tears in their eyes. The reception was simple, held in a nearby community hall. There was plenty of food prepared by the staff of Robert's restaurant, live music from a guitarist playing romantic and cheerful songs, and lots of conversation. Helen danced with Robert, then with Gabriel, then Robert danced with his son. Mrs. Martha cried the whole time, saying she had never seen such a beautiful and true wedding. When night fell and the party ended, the three of them went home. There was no honeymoon planned. The simple apartment was all they needed at that moment. They put Gabriel to bed, exhausted but happy, and Helen and Robert sat on the small balcony, looking at the city lights. "It was a perfect day," Helen said, resting her head on her husband's shoulder. "It was," Robert agreed, kissing the top of her head. "And it's just the beginning." In the months following the wedding, the new family's life settled into an ever-deepening harmony. Robert decided to reduce his workload, delegating more responsibilities to trusted managers. He wanted to be more present at home, to participate in Gabriel's upbringing, to have time to be with Helen. He discovered that working less didn't diminish his happiness. On the contrary, it increased it exponentially. Helen, encouraged by Robert, started a technical course in culinary arts. She discovered she had a talent and passion for cooking, not just the basic tasks she did at the restaurant, but for creating elaborate, creative dishes. Robert supported her every step of the way, tasting her creations, offering suggestions, believing in her when she doubted herself. Gabriel continued to thrive in school. His dream of becoming a doctor remained firm, and now he had all the support he needed to pursue that goal. Robert was already talking about saving for college, about providing his son with every opportunity he deserved. But amidst all that happiness, there was a shared desire between Robert and Helen that grew stronger every day. They wanted to expand the reach of what they had experienced. They wanted to help other people who were going through what Helen and Gabriel had gone through. And so the idea for the foundation was born. It started with late-night conversations after Gabriel was asleep. Robert used his business experience to think about the structure, feasibility, and resources needed. Helen contributed the perspective of someone who had lived the situation, who knew the real needs, who understood the barriers that homeless people faced. They decided to create the Fresh Start Foundation, dedicated to helping mothers and children in situations of social vulnerability. The goal was to offer not just temporary shelter, but a complete program for social reintegration. This included assisted housing, provision of food and clothing, access to education for children, vocational training for mothers, psychological support, legal aid and follow-up until the families were fully re-established. Robert invested a significant portion of his personal fortune in the project. He bought a large building in an accessible neighborhood, completely renovated it, and hired a multidisciplinary team of social workers, psychologists, educators, and lawyers. Helen became the intake coordinator, using her own story to connect with the women who arrived, scared and distrustful. Her presence was comforting, her understanding was genuine, and her transformation served as an example and a source of hope. The foundation's inauguration was an emotional event. Several local officials attended, the press covered the event, and the first families were welcomed. Among them was a young mother with 2 small children who had just been evicted. Helen welcomed her personally, hugged her, told her she understood what she was going through, and assured her that she would find support to start over. The woman broke down in tears of relief, just as Helen had done when Robert appeared in her life. The foundation's work began to gain recognition. Within a few months, dozens of families had been served. Some managed to get back on their feet quickly, while others needed more time and support, but they all found something there that the traditional system rarely offered: dignity, respect, and a real chance to rebuild. The Fresh Start Foundation's methodology was unlike anything that existed. It wasn't just about offering temporary shelter or meals. The program was comprehensive and personalized. Each family underwent an initial assessment where social workers and psychologists identified specific needs, traumas to be addressed, and skills to be developed. The mothers received psychological support to deal with the post-traumatic stress that life on the streets inevitably caused. They participated in personal development workshops, learned how to write resumes, and practiced for job interviews. Those who wanted to start their own businesses received guidance on how to open small enterprises. Those who wanted to study were referred to vocational courses or even formal education programs. The children, in turn, received intensive educational support to catch up on the time they had missed in school. There were child psychologists specializing in trauma who worked delicately with the little ones so they could process the difficult experiences they had lived through. Recreational, sports, and cultural activities were offered regularly, allowing the children to reclaim the childhood that had been stolen from them. The foundation also offered free legal assistance. Many of the women served had lost their documents, had legal issues, needed to formalize custody of their children, or deal with domestic violence issues. A team of volunteer lawyers dedicated themselves to solving these problems, removing the bureaucratic barriers that hindered these families' social reintegration. Helen was at the heart of it all. Her personal story made her uniquely able to connect with the women who arrived scared and distrustful. She understood the shame, the fear, the feeling of invisibility. When a new mother arrived, it was Helen who welcomed her, who hugged her, who told her with complete sincerity that she understood exactly what she was going through. One of the stories that left a mark on everyone was that of Julia, a 23-year-old who came to the foundation with her 4-year-old twin daughters. Julia had fled an abusive relationship and found herself on the street overnight. When Helen met her, she saw in her eyes the same desperation she had once felt. She worked personally with Julia for months, helping her regain her self-esteem, believe in herself again, and discover her skills. Julia had a talent for crafts. With the foundation's support, she started a small business making jewelry and decorative items. 6 months after arriving at the foundation, she had enough income to rent her own apartment. The day she moved out, she returned to the foundation to say thank you, bringing her daughters dressed in new, smiling clothes. She hugged Helen for long minutes and said that she had saved her life. Helen, moved, replied that she had only offered her the same chance that had once been offered to her. Gabriel, now 10 years old, visited the foundation frequently. He saw children who had been like him, scared, thin, in ragged clothes, and he saw these same children weeks later transformed, attending school, playing, smiling. This reinforced his desire to become a doctor. He wanted to help people. He wanted to make a difference. He wanted to give back to the world what had been given to him. One afternoon, almost 2 years after that initial encounter at the traffic light, the family was gathered in their apartment living room. Robert had suggested moving to a larger, more comfortable place, but Helen preferred to stay there in the space that represented their new beginning. Gabriel was doing homework at the dining table. Helen was reviewing reports from the foundation on the sofa, and Robert was reading a book beside her. Gabriel stopped writing and looked at them. "Dad, can I ask a question?" "Of course, son. What is it?" "Do you regret stopping that day? For listening to me when I knocked on your car window?" Robert closed his book and looked at his son attentively. Helen also stopped what she was doing, curious to hear the answer. Robert stood up, walked over to Gabriel, and knelt beside his chair, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. "Gabriel, that was the most important day of my life. It was the day everything changed. It was the day I stopped just existing and started truly living. You saved me just as much as I saved you. So, no, I don't regret it for a single second. I only regret all the other times I passed by people who needed help and looked the other way." "And now?" Gabriel asked. "Now we're helping other people through the foundation, right?" "Yes, we are, and that's the most beautiful part of it all. What happened to us didn't end with us. It's multiplying, reaching other families, transforming other lives." Gabriel smiled and went back to his homework. Helen wiped away a discreet tear and exchanged a deep look with Robert. They both knew they had found something rare, precious. It wasn't just romantic love or family ties. It was a shared purpose, a joint mission, the certainty that their lives had meaning far beyond themselves. That night, after Gabriel was asleep, Robert and Helen sat on the balcony talking about future plans. The foundation was growing, and there was a possibility of opening a second branch. Gabriel was developing wonderfully, and they were thinking about maybe expanding their family in the future, perhaps adopting another child who needed a home. The possibilities seemed endless, and for the first time in their lives, they both felt that the future was something to be celebrated, not feared. "Did you know it would work out?" Helen asked suddenly. "That first day when you saw me in the alley, were you sure it was worth getting involved?" Robert thought for a moment. "No," he confessed. "I wasn't sure of anything. I was scared, confused, out of my comfort zone. But there was something in Gabriel's eyes, in your eyes when you opened them in that makeshift shelter. It was like the universe was telling me that's where I was supposed to be. And you listened." "I listened. And it was the best decision I ever made." Helen snuggled into his arms, feeling safe, loved, complete. "Sometimes I pinch myself to make sure I'm not dreaming," she murmured. "It's hard to believe that 2 years ago I was literally dying in that alley, without hope, without a future. And now, look where we are." "You fought for this," Robert reminded her. "You could have given up so many times. But you didn't. You kept fighting for Gabriel, for both of you. I just opened the door, but you were the one who had the courage to walk through it." "We saved each other," Helen said with conviction. "Each of us brought something the other needed. You gave us security and opportunity. We gave you purpose and love. It was a perfect exchange." They stayed there, embraced, looking at the lights of the city that had once brought them together so improbably. New York, with all its contrasts, its harshness and its beauty, had been the stage for their story. And now through the foundation, it was becoming a slightly better place, one family at a time. The years passed. Gabriel grew up and continued to be an exemplary son. At 17, he was accepted into medical school at a public university with one of the highest scores on the entrance exams. When he heard the results, he hugged his parents tightly and said that it was all only possible because they had believed in him when no one else did. Helen completed her culinary arts course and then went on to get a degree in nutrition, specializing in food security for vulnerable populations. She became a respected figure in her field, speaking at conferences, writing articles, and always using her story as an example of resilience and transformation. Robert continued to manage his restaurants, but his true passion was the foundation. He dedicated most of his time to expanding the project, seeking partnerships, and ensuring that more and more families had access to the program. The Fresh Start Foundation became a national model, replicated in other cities and states, and it had all started with a simple gesture: a man who stopped his car, a boy who asked for help, a mother who survived. 3 lives that intertwined in an improbable but perfect way, proving that compassion has the power to transform destinies, that a single act of kindness can create ripples that reach far beyond what we can imagine. One late afternoon, years after that initial encounter, the Alden family was gathered in their apartment, which they insisted on keeping as a living memory of their origins. Gabriel, now a young university student, Helen, professionally fulfilled, and Robert, finally complete. They looked around the simple space that had witnessed so many transformations and knew with absolute certainty that they had found exactly what they were looking for. Not material wealth or social status, but something infinitely more valuable: belonging, purpose, and unconditional love. And it all began with a desperate plea at a random New York City traffic light, a plea that changed everything. Forever. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Robert, Helen, and Gabriel has deeply touched your hearts. If you were moved by this journey of overcoming, love, and new beginnings, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment resonated with you the most. This story reminds us that a single gesture of compassion can change lives forever, and that we all have the power to make a difference in the world. Every day we bring you intense and inspiring stories like this one, which reveal the deepest and most beautiful side of the human soul. Don't miss the next episode. Until then, carry with you the message that it's never too late to start over, and that true love has the power to transform everything. We look forward to seeing you soon with more stories that will move you.